My parents tried to cancel my wedding to coddle my cheating sister, now they regret ever taking her side. So, recently, my brother-in-law filed for divorce from my sister after catching her cheating on him with one of his own friends, no less. She'd been acting kind of shady for a while, and one night he finally decided to check her phone. That was all it took. He packed up, moved out, and went ahead with the divorce. The timing couldn't have been worse for me, though. He found out about the affair just over a week before my wedding. By the time the divorce papers were officially filed, I only had 7 days to go before my big day. Ideally, this whole mess shouldn't have had any impact on my wedding, especially since my sister and I aren't exactly close. But my parents? They thought otherwise. They actually had the nerve to ask me to postpone my wedding for an entire year because they thought it would be too upsetting for my poor, innocent sister. I still can't wrap my head around how they consider her innocent when she was literally caught red-handed, exchanging shady messages with her husband's friend. From what I know, there's solid proof. But somehow, in my parents' minds, it was just a bit of harmless flirting, nothing serious. Apparently, they think everybody does that. From what I heard, my sister and this guy were even trying to plan meetups a few times, though for whatever reason, it never quite happened. Maybe she chickened out last minute, or maybe something else came up, but either way, the intent was there, and that's enough. As far as I'm concerned, my brother-in-law is completely justified in wanting a divorce. There's nothing innocent about what she did. But my parents don't see it that way. To them, my sister can do no wrong. That's why they had the audacity to ask me to delay my wedding by a whole year, just to spare her feelings. Never mind that everything had already been paid for. Every detail had been planned, and canceling would have cost us a small fortune. Of course, postponing wasn't even on the table for me and my fiancé. When we told my parents that, they got angry and started making threats. They said they wouldn't come to the wedding at all if we didn't reschedule. My husband and I told them flat out we didn't care. Whether they showed up or not wasn't going to change anything. To be honest, I've never been particularly close to my family anyway. They were invited out of courtesy, not because they held some special place in my life. I wasn't giving them VIP treatment just because we share blood. Truthfully, I've never received any kind of special treatment from them either. If anything, I was always the one left in the shadows while my sister got all the attention. So, we went ahead with the wedding as planned. Now my parents are losing their minds because they think I lied to them by not revealing who my in-laws really are. For some context, my husband's family owns a pharmaceutical company. They're pretty well off, and most of them are involved in the business, including my husband. I never told my family about any of that on purpose. The truth is, I didn't want them knowing. My parents aren't exactly the kind of people I want around wealthy folks. They own a hardware store that's barely stayed afloat for as long as I can remember. It brings in just enough to pay the bills, but that's about it. I guess that's part of why they act the way they do whenever they're around anyone even slightly better off financially. It's hard to describe, but they turn into these awkward, desperate versions of themselves. They start gushing and complimenting people in the weirdest ways, probably hoping someone might take pity on them and throw some money or investment their way. That's been their go-to move for years. They've tried it with family members, friends, anyone with a decent job, and it never works. People can see right through it, and it just makes everyone uncomfortable. Growing up, I used to feel so embarrassed when they did stuff like that. I could tell people were judging not just my parents, but me and my sister, too, especially since she'd sometimes join in on the act. The last thing I wanted was for my husband's family to go through the same thing. So when our families met, I told everyone to keep things vague about their jobs. I knew the moment my parents realized how successful my husband's family was, they'd flip the switch and start laying it on thick. My husband and I have been together for 3 years now, and he's met my family plenty of times. He knows how to deal with them. He always introduced himself like he was just another regular employee. My parents treated him normally because they thought he was just your average guy. They've only met his family once, when we got engaged. During that meeting, his parents kept things low-key too. They made small talk, didn't brag about the business, and since pharmaceuticals have nothing to do with hardware, my parents didn't make any connections. Even the last names didn't ring a bell for them. So, we were in the clear for a while. But after the wedding, the pictures started making rounds. My husband's family reposted them everywhere, and someone ended up sharing a post on the official company's social media page. That's how my parents finally found out who I had married into. The very night of my wedding, they started blowing up my phone calls, texts, everything. They were furious. Said I'd tricked them by not telling the truth. In their minds, I'd robbed them of a huge opportunity by keeping quiet about the kind of people my husband's family are. If they'd known sooner, they wouldn't have skipped the wedding. They would have come ready to cozy up to my in-laws, try to befriend them, and of course, look for chances to talk business and maybe grow their struggling store. After the wedding photos went public and my parents realized who I'd married into, they accused me of lying flat out. They said I had misled them about how important my husband and his family were in their company, and from the way the wedding got featured on the official corporate page, it was clear my in-laws weren't just regular employees. Then they Googled the family's last name, put two and two together, and discovered it was a family-owned business. That's when things really blew up. They were furious, not just because they thought I'd kept the truth from them, but because they believed I'd purposely robbed them of business opportunities. To them, I'd betrayed their trust. And for the first few days after my wedding, I didn't even bother responding. I was finally a newlywed. I wanted to enjoy that time, not get dragged into another guilt trip. But I couldn't avoid them forever. 2 days ago, they showed up at our place demanding answers for why I'd been ignoring them. My husband and I let them in out of basic courtesy, but we made it clear right away we didn't owe them a single explanation. If they were expecting me to grovel or apologize, they were wasting their time. At first, they listened. But then they turned to me, and the emotional manipulation started. They didn't hold back. My mom even started crying right there in our living room. I tried to keep my cool, I really did, but it was hard. They were bringing up the past, reminding me of how they'd raised me, saying they had certain expectations of me as their daughter. I hadn't planned on arguing. I thought I'd just let them say what they needed to say and be done with it. But when they started pushing that narrative about how they'd always been good parents and I'd repaid them with lies and shame, I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. I had to call it out for what it was: revisionist history. Because honestly, they'd only ever tried to be good parents to my sister. When it came to me, they did the bare minimum, just enough to say they'd done their job. So, the conversation turned into a full-on argument. We went back and forth for a while until they told me they were disappointed, not just in what I'd done, but in who I'd become. They said I had cheated them out of a chance to build connections with powerful, successful people, and that the way I'd gone out of my way to keep my husband's family a secret just proved I was ashamed of them. According to them, even if they'd shown up at the wedding, it wouldn't have mattered, because I would have been embarrassed by their presence anyway. Then they brought up the engagement, how we'd kept that small and private, and said it was another example of me trying to hide where I came from. They were convinced it wasn't about keeping my in-laws' identity private, it was about being ashamed of them. That accusation hit me hard because it just wasn't true. I'm not ashamed of not coming from a wealthy background like my husband. What I am ashamed of is the way they act when they're around people who have money. That's the part one didn't want my in-laws to see. That's what embarrassed me, not their income, but their behavior. I tried explaining that, tried telling them it had nothing to do with money and everything to do with how they carry themselves, but they wouldn't hear it. They kept twisting it, saying the fact that I even had to defend myself showed how little they meant to me. That whole porous routine finally pushed me over the edge. I snapped. I told them to get out. I said I didn't owe them anything, not an explanation, not a conversation, nothing. I shouldn't have let them in to begin with. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that we could sit down like adults and talk things out. But it was obvious that was never going to happen with them. As they were leaving, my mom was still crying. She told me I'd always been ashamed of my family, that I thought I was better than everyone else, and now it was all just coming to the surface. She said I was no different than them, just as shallow and phony, but because I had some superiority complex, I thought I was above it all. Before walking out, they said skipping the wedding was a mistake, but not as big as the mistake of thinking they could still have a relationship with me. They said they regretted wasting their time trying to talk to me at all, especially since I clearly didn't value them or the rest of my family. So now, here I am wondering if I should have properly introduced my parents to my in-laws. Was I wrong for keeping it quiet? Update 1. Hey everyone, thanks so much for all the love, comments, and advice. Before I dive into the update, I just want to clear a few things up. When I said I'm not particularly close to my family, that doesn't just mean my parents and sister, I meant most of my extended family too. The only relatives who got invited to my wedding were a couple of cousins and a few aunts and uncles that I actually get along with. That's it. And they never breathed a word about who my in-laws were, even though some of them knew, because they understood exactly why I wanted to keep that information away from my parents. They respected that boundary. So yeah, my wedding was always going to be private and low-key on my side. That wasn't a cover-up, it was intentional. It just wasn't a big deal to us. Now, on to the present. After everything that happened, and with all the support and perspective you all gave me, my husband and I decided to cut ties with my parents completely. We don't need this kind of negativity hanging over our heads. I owe them nothing, not an apology, not a conversation, nothing. And you're absolutely right, they were the ones who chose not to come to my wedding. I didn't uninvite them. They could have been there, but they made a conscious decision to stand by my sister, even though she was the one who screwed up her marriage. That was their choice, and now they can live with it. I don't have to feel guilty. My husband and I are leaving for our honeymoon in a couple of days, and when we get back, we'll be moving into a new house. It was a surprise wedding gift from his parents, and honestly, it couldn't have come at a better time. Now, even if my parents wanted to show up and cause a scene, they won't know where to find us. We're making sure my parents never get their hands on our new address. At least for a while, we're not sharing it with anyone outside our closest circle. Maybe a couple of friends will know, but no one from my family, definitely not yet. Thankfully, my in-laws have been nothing but kind and supportive through this whole mess with my parents. When they found out my folks had shown up at our door uninvited, they even offered to take down the company's wedding post, the one that started all the drama. But honestly, none of this was their fault. I mean, I married into this family, and I'm proud of that, not just because they're wealthy, but because they're truly kind-hearted people. That's a rare mix these days, and I wasn't about to pretend otherwise. So no, I didn't feel the need to remove the post. The damage had already been done anyway. My parents had found out, and they were already blowing up my phone. At that point, taking it down would have just stirred up even more gossip. Besides, I didn't want to give my parents the satisfaction of thinking they were so important that we had to remove a public celebration just because they were upset. They kept calling and texting nonstop, and yesterday morning I finally put an end to it. I blocked both of them. And just to be safe, I blocked my sister too, even though she hadn't tried to reach out yet. I had a feeling my parents would eventually start using her to try to get to me. I didn't want to leave that door open. For those asking, no, my sister wasn't at the wedding either. Like I mentioned before, we were never really close. She was always kind of a spoiled brat growing up, and as soon as we weren't living under the same roof, we naturally drifted apart. There was no bad blood, so I did invite her, but once her divorce drama started, she clearly decided not to show up. I was perfectly fine with that. What I wasn't fine with was my parents thinking they had any right to demand I postpone my wedding by a whole year just because my sister was dealing with the consequences of her own cheating. Whether she put them up to it or not, I can't say for sure. But knowing her, I'm sure she supported their stance. She's always sided with them and always will. Expecting her to suddenly do the right thing? That would be a waste of hope. Right now, I've got zero contact with most of my family apart from the few relatives who came to the wedding. I've stayed in touch with them and asked them to let me know if anything comes up that might affect me. So far, it's been quiet. But knowing my parents, I can't let my guard down. They're probably still trying to spin this whole thing so I look like the bad guy. I'm just crossing my fingers that nothing happens while we're away on vacation. I've been looking forward to this honeymoon for months, and the last thing I need is for them to ruin it. I know it's probably wishful thinking to hope they'll stay quiet for 2 weeks, but I'm still hoping for the best. Update 2. Hey guys, my husband and I got back from our honeymoon a couple of days ago, and it turns out my parents didn't cause any trouble while we were gone. But I guess that was only because they were biding their time and waiting for us to return. This morning, my mother-in-law gave me a call. She sounded really concerned and asked us to come over right away. Apparently, my parents had shown up at their house. I still don't know how they figured out where my in-laws live. They're pretty private people, but I guess my parents have their ways. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. What really embarrassed me was why they came. They went there to talk about me. About what I'd done. They actually told my in-laws that, as the adults in the family, they needed to sit down and have a serious discussion about our disrespectful behavior so it wouldn't be repeated in the future. I have no idea what made them think that was okay. I'm a grown woman. This isn't some teenage rebellion they need to fix. And even if it were, it should have been handled privately, not dragged into my husband's family. But of course, they knew my in-laws would contact us right away. That's probably why they did it, to force me into talking to them. And considering the timing, I wouldn't be surprised if they knew exactly when we'd be back from the honeymoon. Which only means one thing: someone we trusted has been feeding them information. That's a separate issue I'll need to deal with soon. But today wasn't about that. Today was about my parents ambushing my in-laws in their own home. The whole situation was humiliating. My husband and I rushed over to try to do some damage control before it got even worse. When we arrived, my parents were sitting in the living room like they owned the place, acting overly familiar, smiling, chatting away like everything was fine. My poor in-laws were clearly uncomfortable. My father-in-law had been sitting there quietly, awkwardly nodding along while my parents did their usual fake friendly routine. My mother-in-law opened the door for us, and even though she's incredibly graceful, I could tell she was stressed. I was furious inside, but I kept it together. I didn't want to make a scene, especially not in my in-laws' home. I took a deep breath, walked in, and calmly told my parents that what they did, showing up like that, was completely out of line. What really got under my skin was that my parents dragged my in-laws into something that had absolutely nothing to do with them. This whole situation was between me and my parents. My in-laws should have never been involved. If they wanted to talk, they could have come to my house like adults. When I pointed that out, they said they already tried that and it didn't work. And yeah, I hated to admit it, but they were right about one thing: they knew I'd come running if they went through my in-laws, which is exactly why they did it. But honestly, that doesn't matter. If I didn't want to speak to them, they should have respected that, especially considering how they've always treated me like an afterthought. They didn't even bother showing up for my wedding, and now here they were trying to paint me as the villain? That takes serious nerve. They claimed they went to my in-laws' place because they wanted us all to sit down as a family and work things out. I told them calmly but firmly that I had no interest in working things out with them. I didn't want to hash anything out. I just wanted space. I tried really hard to keep it civil, but I know they could hear the anger in my voice. I was practically shaking trying to hold it in. That's when they turned to my in-laws and said, "See what we mean? This is what we've been dealing with," like they were the ones who'd been wrong this whole time. Thankfully, my in-laws didn't just sit there and let that slide. They immediately stood up for me. My mother-in-law told them that if I needed space, I obviously had my reasons, and that instead of forcing themselves into my life, they needed to respect my boundaries. My parents were clearly caught off guard. I don't think they expected my in-laws to back me up so openly. Then my father-in-law chimed in. He said they had stayed quiet and polite up until now, but since we were all there, he wanted to make one thing clear: they didn't think I'd done anything wrong. And now that I was part of their family, they were going to support me 100%, no matter what. If I chose not to have a relationship with my parents, that was my decision, and they expected my parents to respect that if they truly cared about my happiness. At that point, my parents went silent. Whether it was shock or embarrassment, or maybe they realized they couldn't manipulate the situation anymore, I don't know. They got up and left. Not without mumbling under their breath, of course, but at least they didn't say anything else out loud. After they were gone, we sat with my in-laws for a bit and talked things through. They said my parents had been acting weird and overly clingy from the minute they arrived. They'd tried to twist the whole story to make me look like the villain, but thankfully, it didn't work. My in-laws already knew the truth. We left soon after that, and honestly, I just hope my parents learned something from all this. The whole thing was just embarrassing for them, more than anyone else. Update 3. Hey everyone, so it's been about 3 weeks since my parents tried that stunt at my in-laws' place. After that, things were quiet, until this morning. I've been busy lately since we're in the middle of moving into our new house, so I didn't notice all the missed calls until later in the day. Turns out I had 10 missed calls from an unknown number, and a flood of texts. As soon as I started reading them, I realized they were from my sister, probably using a burner phone. She was begging me to pick up the phone because she wanted to talk about how I was treating our parents. She said I was tearing the family apart, and that our parents had been miserable ever since I humiliated them in front of my in-laws. I didn't call her back, but I also didn't block her, at least not right away. I was curious to see what else she'd try to say. So I texted her, plain and simple: none of this was my fault. And if she or my parents really believed that it was, then they were delusional. I reminded her that they were the ones who chose to skip my wedding for her sake. They were the ones who barged into my in-laws' house and made a scene. If they ended up getting humiliated, they brought that on themselves. She responded with a long, dramatic message, saying I'd made everyone unhappy, and that our parents were already having a hard time dealing with her divorce. She insisted she hadn't really cheated, but that her husband was accusing her anyway, and everything was just too much. According to her, I had added to their suffering and that made me heartless and selfish. I just told her that this entire family needed a serious reality check. Accountability isn't optional, and I was glad they were finally facing the consequences of their own behavior. I added that she, especially, needed to hear that, considering she's still out here pretending she's innocent when everyone knows she cheated. That must have hit a nerve, because she went off on me, cursing me out through texts and just being nasty. That was it for me. I blocked the number and decided I was done, completely and permanently. I've said everything I needed to say. Update 4. Hey folks, almost a year has passed since I got married, and I figured I'd give one final update. I haven't spoken to my parents since we moved, and honestly, life's been a lot more peaceful. I recently found out who was feeding them information about me back then. It was one of my cousins, someone I used to trust. They were apparently close with my sister and thought they were helping the family reconcile. Needless to say, that cousin has been cut off too. That's actually what reminded me to post this update. From what I've heard, my sister moved to a new city a few months after her divorce was finalized. My parents also sold their hardware store and moved with her to start fresh somewhere else. Honestly? I wish them the best, mainly so they stay far away from me. I'm not sure how long I can keep them out of my life though, because my husband and I are planning to start a family soon. I have a feeling that once the pregnancy is announced, they'll try to come crawling back. But we'll deal with that if and when it happens. Right now, we're just living our lives. My husband and I recently celebrated our first anniversary, and we're happy, stable, and excited about what's to come. Life is good and peaceful, and that's all I've ever really wanted.